2015, the year where the letter S plays an important role, with Saturn, Sagittarius, and Scorpio. Hi, I'm Kathy Rose, inviting you to join me on a tour of the astrological patterns for 2015 as we explore how these patterns affect our world and your world. The year begins with the planet Saturn transiting the sign Sagittarius. It will have entered that sign right around Christmas 2014. Now it's going to stay in Sagittarius for just the first 6 months of the year. And during that time, we're probably going to be looking at how idealism affects our life. In other words, our wishes, goals, dreams, how we like to see things in the most perfect world. It's also going to focus a little bit on our spirituality, because Saturn's going to be making a square to Neptune. Ultimately, during that Saturn and Sagittarius time, while it squares Neptune, we're going to be asked to really look at things practically and not get caught up in idealism. The second phase of this Saturn transit is going to start in June, and it goes from June to September when Saturn retrogrades back and transits the critical degrees of Scorpio. That's the 28th and 29th degree. Scorpio is passionate, intense, focused, and the energy is really on releasing what needs to be released and rising to a higher level of spiritual consciousness. But there is enormous emotional pressure associated with those critical degrees of Scorpio. And I find it fascinating that President Obama has a 28-degree Scorpio midheaven, so he's receiving that transit from Saturn. And the pressure will be on him. The Congress and the President have to work together. They must find a way to communicate and get along. Frankly, I don't think it's going to be an easy task, particularly when Saturn is in Scorpio. And speaking of government, we have to remember the fact that we have Uranus and Pluto squaring each other. Uranus is in Aries, square Pluto in Capricorn, and that final square is going to take place in March. Those two planets will still be dancing close to each other, but the exact final square is in March. Now, one thing to consider about this, Uranus in Aries is all about individualism and freedom and personal responsibility. Pluto in Capricorn has a lot to do with the government and the structure of the government and the role that government plays. And isn't it interesting, as these two planets have been in a dynamic square, which is kind of a conflicting aspect, we've had the conflict in the world about the role of government in our life. Well, in March, as that final square takes place, I think we're going to see some critical issues, particularly because I think that there's going to be infighting with the Congress and the President and trying to get along and making decisions. All right, now we've talked a lot about intensity. Let's talk about something more positive, a little bit lighter, and that's the planet Jupiter. Jupiter will continue its transit through Leo until August of this year. So if you have planets that fall between 12 to 29 degrees Leo, you're going to receive the beneficial rays of expansive Jupiter. It tends to be fairly lucky, it tends to be a reward period, it tends to help you get on track. Starting August 12th, Jupiter enters the sign Virgo. What a dynamic shift that's going to be after Jupiter has been in Leo for a year. Remember, Jupiter stays in one sign for a year. So if you have planets in early Virgo, in the very beginning of the degrees, then you're going to find for the last 6 months of the year, you get that beneficial energy from Jupiter and your life expands. It's a lucky time, and you want to prepare for that by starting to move things forward purposefully. Interestingly enough, we're going to have Venus turning retrograde in Leo. Let's talk about that. Venus is the planet that deals with relationships and our social energy. Starting in June, Venus will transit Leo and will stay there until October. It's going to be in that one sign for a much longer period than normal because it goes retrograde in Leo. Now, what's fascinating about this, Venus in Leo has a lot of pride and kind of a lot of ego. This is when we care about our appearance. This is when we take a lot of pride in how we present ourselves to the world, but we can also get easily offended. So we need to watch while Venus is in Leo that we keep our ego in check. On the other hand, what's fascinating to me is in early August, a very dynamic configuration will take place when we have Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter in Leo squaring the planet Saturn in Scorpio. That's going to be a powerful time frame, especially in our government. But in our own personal world, that's when we need to monitor our relationships and make sure we keep our ego in check and make sure we're operating out of the highest level of Leo, which is love. That's the heart chakra energy. That's unconditional love. And last, let's talk about Mercury retrograde cycles. No astrological overview would be complete without talking about Mercury retrograde. Let me begin though by saying please don't be afraid of Mercury retrograde. Please don't program something negative. You hear it all the time in reports and you read it online. Mercury retrograde is simply a time to integrate information at a different level. It's when you internalize things. But if Mercury retrograde transits by conjunction a particular part of your chart, if it conjuncts a planet or an angle in your chart, it's extremely productive. I look forward to those times. I seem to get a lot done when Mercury retrograde hits my chart directly. So now let's look at the 3 times that Mercury will turn retrograde in 2015. In January and February, Mercury will be transiting the sign Aquarius. So if you have planets in Aquarius, then you might very well receive this transit. Then, May and June, it retrogrades in Gemini. And then finally in September and October, it retrogrades in Libra. I hope you've noticed that all 3 of those signs are air signs. Mercury tends to be fairly powerful in air signs anyway because it's a communication planet and the air signs are intellectually based. If you don't know whether you have planets in those signs, I know a good astrologer you could call and you could schedule a consultation and we can talk about it. But honestly, knowing if Mercury retrograde is hitting your chart is important because it is extremely productive. Let's plant that positive seed right now, okay? So that wraps up the astrological tour for 2015. And I just want to leave you with one very important concept, and that is, please remember, planets don't do things, people do. The planetary energy is the fuel that we can use to change our life, but we choose how to use it. So use it well. And I hope you have a great year. Thank you.